I still remember the exact moment my heart sank that day. I had just been discharged from the hospital, moving slowly through the bright, sterile hallways, clutching a small bag with my medication and paperwork. At 65, I wasn't fragile yet, but I was tired, more tired than I wanted to admit. All I wanted was to see a familiar face waiting outside, to know I wasn't alone in the world. So I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to my son, Michael. I told him I was ready to be picked up. For a few minutes, I stared at the screen, waiting for those 3 dots that meant he was typing back. Instead, what I got was a reply from Sarah, my daughter-in-law. She told me they couldn't keep dropping everything for me, and that I should just call an Uber. Those words cut deeper than the IV needle that had been in my arm. I sat there on the hospital bench, surrounded by strangers in wheelchairs and walkers, and felt invisible. Not sick enough to deserve care, not valuable enough to earn their time. My own family had dismissed me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I tried to swallow my pride, telling myself maybe they were busy, maybe life was hectic. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I had become a burden in their eyes, someone to be managed instead of loved. It was humiliating, knowing that the same child I once carried through fevers and scraped knees now found me too heavy to carry through a moment of need. The loneliness hit me harder than the cold wind outside those glass doors. For the first time in my life, I felt truly abandoned by the very people I thought would always be there. I pressed my phone to my chest, closed my eyes, and let that feeling sink in, even though it burned. But here's the thing. I didn't know then that this moment of humiliation was only the beginning. I didn't know that the ride I was about to accept from a stranger would change everything. The person who came to pick me up that day wasn't just anyone. He was someone who carried pieces of my past, and he was about to hand me the truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. When I finally slid into the back seat of the car that afternoon, I expected nothing more than polite small talk on the way home. Instead, the man who picked me up studied me a little too closely in the rearview mirror. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just trying to figure out if I was comfortable. But then he said my name, not the married one everyone uses, but my maiden name, Dorothy Sullivan. Hearing it out loud made me freeze. Hardly anyone called me that anymore. I asked him how he knew, and that's when everything began to unravel. His name was Robert Hamilton, and he wasn't just some driver. He worked in finance, at the very bank where my accounts were held. He told me quietly, almost regretfully, that he'd seen paperwork come across his desk that didn't sit right. Accounts opened in my name, checks with my signature that didn't look quite the same, medical documents that painted me as confused, incapable, even unfit to handle my own money. Each word he spoke felt like a knife. My own son had painted me as weak and incompetent so he could control everything. Robert explained how Michael had forged documents, how he'd quietly shifted funds, and how he was building a case to take legal control over my assets. The betrayal twisted my stomach. My son wasn't just dismissing me as a burden, he was actively erasing me, stripping away the very independence I had fought to hold on to. I sat in silence, my pulse pounding in my ears, my throat tight. The shame of it all, the heartbreak, it was almost too much. And yet, Robert's voice was steady, calm, like he was guiding me through a storm. Then came the moment that changed everything. He hesitated before saying it, as if unsure he should. He told me he'd recognized my maiden name immediately because he had once known me by it, decades ago. And then it hit me, Bobby. My Bobby. The boy I had loved when I was barely out of high school. The one I had cried over when he vanished from my life without explanation. The years seemed to collapse between us in that instant. My shock over Michael's betrayal still burned, but it was suddenly mixed with something else: nostalgia, warmth, the faint spark of a love I thought I had lost forever. I stared out the window, emotions colliding inside me, realizing that life had just handed me two truths. At once my son had betrayed me in ways I could hardly imagine, and the man who could help me fight back was the same boy I had once dreamed of marrying. And as the car carried me closer to home, I knew this was no coincidence. This was the beginning of something bigger, a reunion with the past, and a chance to take back my future. It's hard to put into words what it felt like, sitting across from Robert again after all those years. For decades, I had carried a quiet ache in my chest, a question that never fully left me. Why did he disappear? Why did the boy I loved so deeply vanish without a word, leaving me to piece myself back together in silence? As we sat together, the truth began to come out. We were young then, too young to understand how easily people's whispers and meddling hands could tear two hearts apart. He told me how he'd been sent away for work, promised letters that never reached me. I admitted how my parents had hinted he wasn't suitable, feeding me lies that he had moved on, that he didn't care. We laughed a little at the cruelty of it all, but it was a laughter edged with sadness. So much time lost, so many years spent apart, building separate lives while always carrying the memory of what we once had. And yet, as we talked, it became clear the feelings had never truly left. They had just been tucked away, waiting, like embers under ashes. There was something healing in that moment, something almost holy. After the crushing betrayal of my son, after being treated like nothing more than a burden, to suddenly feel seen, remembered, cherished, it was overwhelming. His eyes softened when he looked at me, not with pity, but with recognition, as if he could still see the girl I once was, not just the weary woman I had become. I felt my heart steadying, my spine straightening. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't just a discarded mother, written off as an inconvenience. I was Dorothy Sullivan again, a woman who had been loved, who still had the strength to fight for her dignity and her future. Sitting there with Robert, I realized that maybe the universe was giving me a gift, a reminder that while betrayal can break you, love, real love, has the power to piece you back together. And as the conversation shifted from our past to the storm of deceit my son had created, I knew I wasn't facing this battle alone. The next step would be painful, but necessary. It was time to stop being a victim and start uncovering the truth. And Robert was right there beside me, ready to help. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Sitting at Robert's kitchen table, papers spread out between us, I watched the full weight of Michael's betrayal take shape in black and white. What had begun as a vague suspicion, a whisper of doubt, became undeniable proof staring me in the face. There were mortgage statements showing payments missed, even though I had given Michael money to cover them. There were forged medical records declaring I was suffering from early-stage dementia. documents I had never seen, signed with a shaky imitation of my own handwriting. There were accounts I didn't recognize, credit cards opened under my name, expenses I never made, lavish dinners, luxury purchases, travel costs all hidden under the guise of care expenses for me. Each page I turned felt like another slap in the face. This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't desperation. It was deliberate, methodical, and cruel. My son, the boy I had raised, the man I had trusted, had built an entire web of lies with me at the center, waiting to snare me the moment I stumbled. The anger came in waves, sharp and hot. But underneath it was something even stronger. Resolve. For too long, I had let myself be quiet, ignored, dismissed as invisible. But not anymore. I wasn't just a name on a forged document. I was his mother, and I was not going to let him erase me to make room for his greed. Robert leaned across the table, his voice steady but firm. He explained how Michael had been moving money between accounts, preparing to petition for full legal control over my assets. Once that happened, I wouldn't just lose my independence, I would lose everything my late husband and I had worked for. My chest tightened. But this time, it wasn't with fear. It was with determination. I thought of all the nights I had stayed up with Michael when he was sick, all the years I had put him first, even after his father passed. To know that he could repay that love with betrayal, it broke something in me. But it also built something new, a steel spine I didn't know I still had. Robert and I spent hours mapping out a plan. He knew the bank would be meeting with Michael soon about the accounts. That would be the moment, the chance to bring the truth into the light. I would need to be there, to stand in front of the people he had deceived and show them that I was not the frail, confused woman he painted me to be. As I gathered the papers into a neat stack, my hands no longer trembled. They were steady, purposeful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not a victim, not a burden, but a woman preparing to take her life back. I could already see the scene in my mind, Michael, smug and confident, spinning his lies in front of the bankers. And then me, walking in, ready to shatter every illusion he had so carefully built. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. The morning of the meeting, my heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Robert and I arrived early, slipping quietly into a side room with tinted glass where we could see but not be seen. I pressed my palms against the table, steadying myself. This was it, the moment I would step out of the shadows and face my son head on. Michael walked in with the air of a man who had already won. His suit was crisp, his smile polished, every gesture calculated to exude confidence. I almost didn't recognize him. The little boy who once clung to my hand on the first day of school had grown into a man who looked at his own mother as prey. He shook hands with the bank officers, thanking them for meeting on such short notice. I listened as he began spinning his tale, painting me as a woman slipping quickly into decline. He spoke with such conviction that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. He described my supposed confusion, the danger of leaving me unsupervised, the urgency of protecting my finances before I did something reckless. My stomach twisted with every word. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly, like he had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. The officers nodded sympathetically, jotting down notes. He had them right where he wanted them. And that was when Robert gave me the smallest nod. It was time. I opened the door and stepped into the room. The sound of my heels against the floor cut through Michael's monologue. He froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening in disbelief. For a brief second, I saw panic flash across his face before he covered it with a strained smile. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked calmly to the empty chair at the table and sat down. My hands were steady as I folded them in front of me. "Funny thing about dementia," I said softly, locking eyes with him. "It doesn't usually let you remember every detail of a forged document." The room went silent. The bankers glanced between us, clearly confused. Michael stammered, trying to recover, insisting he was only doing what was best for me, that he was protecting me from myself. But I didn't let him control the narrative this time. For years, I had been quiet, patient, willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. That woman was gone. I told them in clear, unwavering words that I was of sound mind, that the story they had just heard was a fabrication designed to strip me of my independence and my money. I could feel the shift in the room as the officers leaned back, doubt creeping into their expressions. Michael's confidence faltered, his polished veneer beginning to crack. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from standing tall in your own truth. As Michael fumbled for words, I sat straighter, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I wasn't just defending myself. I was reclaiming the narrative, dismantling his lies piece by piece with nothing more than calm authority. This was only the beginning. The evidence Robert carried would soon speak louder than any words. But for now, the silence that followed my statement was victory enough. And I could see it in Michael's eyes. He knew the walls around him were starting to crumble. The silence in that bank office was heavy, almost suffocating. For a moment, Michael tried to laugh it off, pretending my sudden appearance was just proof of his concern. He told them he had been worried about me wandering into places unannounced, that this was exactly the kind of behavior that showed I couldn't be trusted. But then Robert opened his briefcase. He laid out the documents carefully, one by one, like cards in a high-stakes game. Bank statements with signatures that didn't match my own. Medical records declaring I was no longer competent, records signed by doctors who had never treated me. Checks deposited into accounts linked directly to Michael. Each piece of paper was a brick pulled from the walls of his lies. I watched Michael's face as the officers leaned forward, studying the evidence. His jaw tightened. His smile faltered. He reached out, almost snatching one of the documents from the table, muttering that it was all a misunderstanding, that the paperwork must have been mixed up. Then he turned to me, his voice softening, his eyes wide with feigned hurt. He called me Mom in that pleading tone he used as a child when he wanted something he didn't deserve. He said he was only trying to protect me, that I didn't understand how vulnerable I was becoming, that everything he had done was for my own good. For a brief second, the mother in me ached. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the illusion that my son still cared. But then I remembered the hospital bench, the cruel dismissal, the forged records. I remembered how he had reduced me to a burden in his mind, a stepping stone to wealth and control. I met his eyes and felt the strength rise in me. I told him, firmly, that I saw through him now. that love doesn't look like forged signatures and stolen money, that no matter how much I had once wanted to believe in him, I would not let him manipulate me into silence. The bankers exchanged uneasy glances. The evidence was overwhelming, and Michael knew it. His confident mask had cracked wide open, and beneath it was desperation. His words stumbled, his tone turned sharp, then frantic. The predator, who once thought he held every advantage, was losing control right in front of me. For the first time, it wasn't me who felt small. It was him. And the weight of that realization filled me with a cathartic relief I can't fully describe. As Robert gathered the last piece of evidence into a neat pile, I knew there was no turning back. The lies had collapsed, and Michael was standing in the ruins of his own making. And for the first time in years, I could finally breathe. In the days that followed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: relief. It wasn't the kind that comes from problems disappearing overnight, but the kind that comes when you finally stop carrying a weight that was never yours to bear. For years, I had protected Michael, excused his behavior, convinced myself that family loyalty meant covering for him no matter what. But now, as the evidence was handed over to the authorities, I felt a strange kind of freedom. I had spent so much of my life being his mother, shielding him, forgiving him, trying to believe he was better than his worst actions. But this time, I let go. I told myself it wasn't betrayal to step aside and let justice take its course. It was survival. It was reclaiming the dignity he tried to steal from me. Watching Michael face the consequences wasn't easy. A part of me will always ache for the little boy he once was, the child who used to run into my arms. But I couldn't confuse that memory with the man he had become. Love doesn't mean blind acceptance. Sometimes, love means letting someone fall so they can no longer hurt you or themselves any longer. Through all of this, Robert never left my side. There were moments I would catch his hand reaching for mine, steady and warm, grounding me when my thoughts drifted into grief. We walked together, side by side, not as two people clinging to the past, but as two souls rediscovering that time hadn't erased what was once between us. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold, we walked along the path outside my apartment. His hand found mine, and I didn't pull away. For the first time in months, I felt not just safe, but hopeful. Life had broken me open, but in that brokenness, something new had bloomed. Michael's choices had carved deep wounds, but Robert's presence reminded me that healing was possible. I was no longer defined by betrayal. I was defined by the strength to face it and the courage to embrace love again. And as we walked together into the soft glow of twilight, I knew my story wasn't ending here. It was only shifting into something new. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the deepest betrayals carry with them the clearest lessons. My son's choices broke my heart, but they also stripped away the illusions I had been holding on to. They forced me to see the truth that love cannot survive where there is deception, and that loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for someone who would gladly erase you. But life is never only about what we lose. It's also about what we find when we're willing to stand up again. In facing Michael's lies, I discovered something I had forgotten. I am stronger than I thought. I am capable of protecting myself, of reclaiming my voice, of drawing a line between who I was and who I refused to become. And in the middle of that storm, life handed me something unexpected. Robert's return reminded me that even when years are lost, love can survive in the quiet corners of our hearts, waiting for the right moment to be found again. To feel seen, to feel cherished after so much pain, that was a gift I never expected, and one I treasure deeply. If there's one truth I want to leave with you, it's this: we are never too old, too tired, or too broken to fight for our dignity. Betrayal may shake us, but it does not define us. Strength comes from choosing to rise, even when others would rather see us fall. And maybe, just maybe, life has a way of surprising us with second chances when we least expect them. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear yours. Have you ever felt underestimated or had to reclaim your strength after being betrayed? Share it in the comments, I promise. Your voice matters here. And if you found a piece of yourself in my journey, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories like this. Because no matter where we are in life, none of us are truly alone. Together, our stories remind us that resilience is possible, love is worth holding on to, and strength can always be rediscovered.